Hello, and welcome to this Is It Time for the Draft Yet edition of the Purple Journal podcast. I am your host, Joe Johnson, owner of purplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com, here with a cadre of superstars. Joe Oberly first.
Yeah, I don't think it's draft time yet. I was outside the other day. It's still too damn cold for draft.
It's a little cold out there. I always go back to the Chris Farley skit on Saturday Night Live where he drinks that giant, like man-sized NyQuil called Hibernal because he wants to miss the off season. That's basically where I'm at right now. But Joe writes for the Sports Post and purplePTSD.com. He also has been a VIP man about town. He very well may end up on stage during Justin Timberlake's halftime show, the way things are progressing.
Got to get my wardrobe all set up for that.
Oh.
Don't want any malfunctions.
Nipplegate 2.0, the Joe Oberly edition. That is Luke Braun in the background. He writes for purplePTSD.com, VikingsTerritory.com. He also co-hosts the Pocket Protector podcast with some of the fellows from the ClimbingThePocket.com. How you doing? That was a good segue because we have a special guest, friend of the show. He's been on a few times now, and he is our draft expert over at VikingsTerritory.com. He also does a ton of stuff for ClimbingThePocket.com. It's Mr. Jordan Reid.
Welcome back.
Oh, man, thank y'all for having me. I'm excited.
Good to have you.
Somebody needs to be excited.
We're just like sleepy.
Well, I don't really blame anybody. I mean, I'm trying to get as much caffeine in here as possible, but it's kind of slim pickings. It's dark times in Vikings land. Jordan, we've kind of added to our audience since the last time you were on the show. If you wanted to just kind of introduce yourself to our new listeners and people that aren't familiar with you, since you do a lot of off-season stuff for us.
Yeah, and like Joe said, I'm the lead draft analyst over at Viking Territory. I also help out at ClimbingThePocket.com alongside Jason Brown, Miles Gorham, and Yinka Allende, a website that we started up a couple years ago. So I do some draft stuff, and I also do some Viking stuff over there as well. So once again, thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, and you weren't obviously on the show last week, and we delved into this a lot, so we don't really need to belabor the point. But what was your your take on the Philly game, real quickly? I mean,
there isn't much to say about it. Plain and simple, they got their butts kicked all game long, and I thought from all three phases in the game, and from a coaching standpoint, I just thought the Eagles outdid them in every single thing possible. But the one thing I was most disappointed in was it wasn't anything during the game. It actually was Terrence Newman's post-game comments. He said the team just had no energy. Ooh. And I found that to be really sad because you're planning to go to the Super Bowl and to play it in front of your home crowd. How can you not go out there with energy in the NFC Championship game in order to go back home and bring it home, like the hashtag everybody was using? So for him to come out as the Vikings veteran leader and their voice of reason, for him to come out and say that was really disappointing. So I think Terrence Newman's comments was the most glaring thing that stuck out to me. But from the game standpoint, I just thought they simply got outcoached in every single possible category. And I mean, you can't win ball games turning the ball over. And I thought, of course, the pick six changed the momentum of the game, but I thought the deflating blow, was the Derek Barnett strip sack. I thought that completely changed everything in the momentum of the game, because the Vikings offense was driving. They were driving to get back into the game and give themselves some life, but that strip sack just completely changed the momentum and the outlook of the game.
It was such a poor scheme they set up to try and block him coming in. That Didn't
Was
work.
that Jerick McKinnon was supposed to swing around and pick him up or
No,
something?
it was
It was
David.
David Morgan.
Yeah, David Morgan had to come all the way across the formation.
That's what
I would have to look at it again, but I feel like Case Keenum has the power to fix that and didn't read it right.
Like
But I have to
pre-snap?
look at it again to confirm.
It was just a bad play call, guys, because what Shermer was trying to emulate, it was a split zone protection, where David Morgan usually comes across when they're running inside zone. What they originally were trying to do is they were trying to make the edge harder for Brandon Graham to come around to beat Rashad Hill on. They were trying to make his arc or his path wider to the quarterback, but it was just a bad call because now you're asking David Morgan to come all the way across the formation to block a free rusher that's running full speed right at the quarterback. So I thought it was just a bad play call.
No chance.
And you know it has to be pretty rough. I mean, I know this element has always existed, and we kind of have poked fun at this last couple weeks, but I've been surprised by how many people that follow our website have started buying into this whole NFL is rigged nonsense that seems to be getting bigger and bigger out there. And so I wrote an article about that this week, and we don't really need to dignify it any more than I guess I did this week, but it's just the team has to be beat pretty badly for people that follow the team enough to be cognizant of the Purple PTSD Facebook page to suddenly say, I didn't believe it before, but I believe it now. The NFL is rigged. So
Didn't you see my comment on your story, Joe?
I did.
It's Russian bots, man. They're the ones that.
My question is, who in the NFL hates the Vikings this much to make it so they're the team that always has to break their team's heart? I don't know.
Ghost of Ed Thorpe.
Yeah. Anyway, beyond that, there's been a few stories floating out there. We're going to get into some draft stuff since the Vikings season is over. Obviously, the Super Bowl's this weekend. The biggest story that seems to be floating around, at least the Vikings writers' sphere, is the whole Kirk Cousins is available story coming out and building over the last week or so. But obviously, with Alex Smith getting traded to the Redskins, Kirk Cousins is not going to be back or franchised or anything. I thought we could start that discussion by Luke, if you want to kind of take that, explain your article that you wrote today, or was it yesterday?
I posted it last night, but I plugged it all this morning.
And I did too. Double plug.
Yeah, good for our Facebook audience. Yeah, so when Alex Smith got traded last night, first of all, that was a blast to follow on Twitter because we didn't. That came out that it was Kendall Fuller also was a part of the trade, and then he wasn't, but then he was again, and it was a whole bunch of fun chaos.
It's rigged.
And all the Redskins players were finding out at the same time as all of us, and I just find that amazing and fun. But anyways, yeah, so Kirk Cousins is kind of the man of the hour, and every team that isn't dead set locked in at quarterback is starting to envision ooh, Kirk Cousins, is he our guy? I have two major problems with Kirk Cousins, and the first one is that he's pretty bad under pressure. He just sort of reverts to throwing up YOLO balls, which is not a good thing, like it kind of was for Case Keenum this year, where he would throw up aggressive balls, but they weren't always just kind of blind shots at the moon. They were pretty good passes under pressure often. I actually think Case Keenum had a really nice season under pressure. Kirk Cousins he's the kind of guy that you can bait into turnovers with pressure, and that's a really good way to waste a good defense. And I think the way to solve that, if you can't protect him, say the Eagles could protect Kirk Cousins, or the Cowboys or the Redskins had been able to with their really good offensive line when it was healthy, is you go to more West Coast concepts, more rub concepts and screens and stuff like that to get the defense to back off. Kirk Cousins has actually thrown a reasonable number of turnovers in that context too, and I just don't really think that I can stomach paying a quarterback who's bad at the easy stuff, and locking him in the way that you probably would have to lure him away from the Broncos or the Jets or the Browns or whoever. So it's if you want to fix his pressure problem, you just introduce another problem, and that's just because he's not that inspiring of a quarterback. He's kind of there. Don't swing for the fences just for the sake of swinging.
when you're this close as the Vikings are, you don't you can't afford to, with the salary cap and everything else, to just load it all into one player that you think is going to is not just a superlative talent that somehow got loose in free agency. He's a middling guy in my estimation at best. He's not as good as what the Vikings had on the roster this season. I mean, he's about as good, or he's in the same category. But I would rather have a healthy Sam Bradford, Case Keenum playing like he did this year, or a healthy Teddy Bridgewater. I would roll with either one of those before I would be willing to sink what we've heard talk of, upwards of $30 million a year for 5 years. That just then you're going to have to not be able to re-sign a number of the other players, and you're just going to be SOL there on defense or something. So, not for me. I'd rather, as I said it before, I'll say it again. I'd rather have Kirk's cousin than Kirk Cousins. So.
Before you jump on that, JR, I guess I'll be the Kirk Cousins guy just because I have kind of put myself out there as that guy these last couple of weeks, and I wrote an article saying that I was, depending on the price, I was a Kirk Cousins guy. Obviously, the price is probably going to be something that's going to make this unrealistic, but what is it about him, for a guy that is a season removed from basically being a hair under 5,000 yards passing, 25 touchdowns, like 12 interceptions, basically a 2-to-1 TD to interception ratio guy? What is it about that like makes people, like you guys say that you would rather have it like a Teddy Bridgewater who's mostly been unproven? I mean, doesn't he? I know what you're saying about him being like, and I read your article, Luke, and I saw some of the stuff that Jonathan Kinsley posted on his Twitter too, and that he makes bad decisions from time to time, but it doesn't seem that he's really been, that's something that's like shown up on the stat line as much, or are you saying that because
he's always been known as a guy who's a product of his supporting cast, and his best seasons definitely came in like 2015 and 2016 when he had that just like stacked core of receiver like Deshaun Jackson and Jordan Reid and
Garcon.
Yeah, Pierre Garcon, that's the other guy. And when that sort of fell apart, he also fell apart. And I don't think he elevates the talent around him at all. I think he is elevated by it. And that's why I think if he went to a team like Cleveland where they have, Josh Gordon and Corey Coleman and a pretty good offensive line, I actually think he could do okay there. He is weak in the areas where the Vikings cannot afford to have your quarterback be weak in.
Okay. Because to me, my reasoning was there's just too many question marks with Bradford. He's a little bit younger than Bradford, but he obviously hasn't had the injuries that Bradford's had. Teddy, there's question marks there across the board. Case Keenum, who knows what's going to happen there. So my reasoning was if it's only going to cost, $6-7 more million per season to have a guy that'll at least be healthy and produce at a high level. Because before you having said that, Luke, with some of the supporting cast that the Vikings have, obviously being pretty good and, plugging somebody in, even like Case Keenum, looked like a Pro Bowler this season. So I just figured get a guy who can stay healthy and who can ride this window of opportunity out through the next couple of seasons that exists. But I guess that it depends on what the other quarterbacks are going to get too.
You can move a little better than maybe Bradford and maybe Teddy can, but which is a thing in his favor. But JR, what do you think? You're out east, aren't you? You're probably a little bit more about him than we do here.
Yeah, and the Redskins faithful don't really like Kirk Cousins because he wasn't really able ever to get them over the hump. In my opinion, Kirk Cousins is the same guy as Sam Bradford to me, except he's a little bit more mobile. And, their accuracy is probably spot on with each other if you look at the stats. I don't have the stats right here in front of me. Of course, Sam Bradford had that season a year ago where he was just incredible, but as far as the numbers, I think they're probably very similar. Kirk obviously has more touchdowns, but what I mean about that they're similar is that they go as their supporting cast goes. You have to have near perfect surroundings for them to succeed. So I like Kirk Cousins And on the field wise for the Vikings, it makes all the sense in the world. I mean, you walk in the door, he has an elite defense. He has great surroundings with Diggs, Thielen, Rudolph, and then Dalvin Cook coming back. So obviously this would arguably be a better supporting cast than he had with the Redskins from an offensive standpoint. But the money-wise is where I'm very hesitant. Excuse me. He's asking for at least $28 million a year, and reports are already coming out that he wants a deal that rivals or even exceeds what Matthew Stafford got, and Stafford got $135 million over 5 years, and that's just something I'm not willing to pay Kirk Cousins. If I'm paying a quarterback that much, he better be an elite guy and not a guy that is based off how good the supporting cast is. If I'm paying a guy like that, he better be like Aaron Rodgers or somebody like that doesn't need perfect surroundings in order to succeed. He can carry an offense and put it on his back and carry it to wins, and I just don't think Kirk Cousins is able to do that. Also, if you sign Kirk Cousins, you're going to have to let one of Diggs, Barr, Kendricks, and Hunter go because you're not going to be able to afford that along with Kirk Cousins' deal. So I'm not a big fan of it from a contractual or a financial standpoint, but on the field wise, I'm a big fan of it. But obviously we got to use some context in this to where we have to take the financial side into the equation as well, and I just don't think it makes sense for the Vikings.
Money's just getting insane, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't want anything to do with this quarterback market. It's just getting so crazy, and it's going to come crashing down. I feel like eventually teams are just going to like be unable to pay these guys, and something will happen. Teams will either start negotiating contracts lower, or maybe some restrictions will be put in place or something like that, because it's just getting so prohibitive. But
it's a lot like the rookie deals got like 10 years ago, where the teams finally said, like, why are we giving these guys all this money? And that was a different dynamic, obviously, but yeah.
That begs the question, though, what in comparison would we expect to pay for Sam, Case, or Teddy?
There you go. And that was my thing. I figured, since I've been the pro Bradford guy, if we could get a younger, healthier version of him, maybe a little more mobile, since it was always a trade-off question earlier in the season, the mobility between Bradford and Bridgewater, would that be worth $6-7 million more? It sounds like it's not going to be $6 or $7 million more a season. It's going to be ridiculous. But yeah, that is kind of where we're at. I kind of shuddered with Luke saying how we're at this horrible precipice of these contracts getting so expensive, because obviously the Vikings have 3 quarterbacks that were on the roster last year that aren't signed for next year. So it's a rough time.
I think if you don't end up, if it's a couple of years from now and you aren't solved at this position, regardless of who it ends up being, I think it just comes to the point where you're just looking at the draft now, and you did free agency just isn't really an option unless you just really need like a Mike Glennon bridge type person to help you welcome a new rookie in or something like that.
So the news, to put this question in perspective, earlier today was I think it was the younger Wilf brother said that the Vikings are looking to solve the offensive coordinator position first. Then they're going to focus on their quarterback situation.
Which makes sense.
It totally does, and that was one of the things people said about Kirk Cousins. Why would he go to a team that doesn't have an offensive coordinator in place? Do you guys worry at all? I'll kick it to you first, Luke. Do you worry at all about the way that this is set up for the Vikings, that they might miss out on the quarterbacks that they have, or the market in general, because they're doing it in that way, or they have to do it that way with Shermer leaving?
What? Because they're waiting. They're going to solve the offensive coordinator thing well before free agency. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, just
Yeah, nothing can happen. I mean, the fact that the Broncos have been like courting Kirk Cousins so hard is already flirting with the idea of like tampering. They can't touch these guys until March, and the offensive coordinator thing will probably be solved after the Super Bowl. I think the only reason they haven't made a decision yet is because they still want to interview John DeFilippo, who's still in Super Bowl mode. So I think they'll get that figured out.
I more meant
before they have to with the quarterbacks.
I guess maybe more bringing in an offensive coordinator. This obviously is part of the interview process, but maybe having a coordinator that isn't going to end up with the best fit at the quarterback position, or just tying all that in with
it's an interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic with the coordinators that we've looked at, because I think like certain guys will look for different traits at quarterback, and that will affect the decision. But I don't know, JR, you probably are more familiar with him than I am, because I've just looked into him a little bit. But John DeFilippo seems like he runs the kind of thing that requires like very quick reads, which gives me the thought that he would prefer Teddy Bridgewater or even Sam Bradford if Sam's knees could hold up. But I would just love to hear your thoughts on John DeFilippo in general, because that was news that kind of broke today that they're going to interview and are very interested in him.
Yeah, and I've been very outspoken about him and in his corner as far as him becoming the offensive coordinator for the Vikings, and I firmly believe that. And it makes sense now why they've waited so long to name an offensive coordinator. I think all along Zimmer wanted to interview John DeFilippo, because one thing that Zimmer always says is that he loves guys with former head coaching or coordinator experience filling his coordinator spots. And that's the one thing that's giving him pause about Stefanski, that he's never called plays before, which is understandable because that's a big step up from going from a position coach to an offensive coordinator. You have a lot of different duties now. You're over the entire operation as opposed to just focusing on one position. And, I mean, he has the right to do that. Stefanski has never called plays before, like I alluded to before. John DeFilippo has called plays once before on a pro level, I believe, with the Cleveland Browns back in 2015, I believe it was, when he was with Johnny. Yeah, when he was with Johnny Manziel, and he didn't have a lot to work with there, and the stats weren't great. But the one thing that's most impressive about his resume is that he's had a lot of different quarterbacks and a lot of different success with each and every one. He's had his hand in with Carson Palmer, Dante Culpepper, Derek Carr, his rookie year when he went to the Pro Bowl, and had by far the best year of his career. It was one more, Carson Wentz, of course, and he had some success with Johnny Manziel. He even got something out of Johnny Manziel, the best game stretch that we've seen him play when Cleveland actually won the game. John DeFilippo was actually the coordinator the last time they won the game. So what he does run is a traditional West Coast style of offense where it's predicated on a lot of short and intermediate throws, getting the ball out as fast as possible. And it's a lot of concepts that we're seeing Philadelphia run right now as far as RPOs. And you have to have an extremely accurate quarterback in order to succeed in his system. And a lot of people were saying, oh, man, yeah, that's good for Teddy. He'll be in Teddy's corner. But, I mean, we don't really know that because it's a good system for Case Keenum and it's a good system for Sam Bradford as well. So if they do hire John DeFilippo, I think it would be a home run hire. But the one caveat to it, he's probably going to be a head coach either in 2019 or 2020. It's going to happen very fast. He almost got the Bears job this year. He was a finalist for it. So that's the one caveat. If you are to hire John DeFilippo, you'll probably be looking for a new offensive coordinator. If not after next year, then definitely in 2020.
And you probably lose Kevin Stefanski in that permutation, too, because he probably follows Sherman to New York.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Well, that's not good. I hate to think that. You just keep having a swinging gate on the OC position. It'd be nice to have, we get a good one, you keep him here for a while. I know that's not how it works, but damn.
It kind of reminds me of what the Ravens went through kind of during their peak.
Yeah, and the Vikings went through this like in the 90s also, it felt like. So
Tomlin and
Linehan
and Bill, or what's the guy who won with the Ravens?
Brian Billick.
Yeah, Brian Billick. Tony Dungy,
yeah.
So
yeah, I do think that right now, I guess in my opinion, Stefanski and DeFilippo are kind of the front runners, and we've heard some other names. We've heard Sean Ryan and Dan Campbell, and Darrell Bevel's like the establishment candidate, if you will. And I think all those guys are a tier below in terms of OC prospects. Just Bevel doesn't really offer anything that elevates the talent that he had to work with. He just kind of rode Russell Wilson's coattails for a while and sort of made Russell Wilson's job about as hard as it possibly could be. And Dan Campbell doesn't really have much on his resume, and Sean Ryan has he's a quarterback's coach and is kind of credited with Deshaun Watson's really stellar rookie year before he tore his ACL, but it's a short resume. And I think I really like what DeFilippo and Stefanski offer. DeFilippo for all the reasons JR mentioned, but Stefanski just because of his familiarity with this roster and this QB room and the diversity of schemes he's worked under.
And has there been any inclination as to, or has anyone even made a guess as to what Stefanski might do in regards to the three quarterbacks? Luke, I know we talked about him a little bit last week.
I really don't know. I like that was the quarterback's coach this year, which means he worked intimately with all three of them. It means if anybody's going to know where Teddy Bridgewater's mobility is at, it's going to be Kevin Stefanski. And if anybody's going to know what Sam Bradford's capable of right now, it's going to be Kevin Stefanski. And obviously he knows what he has in Case Keenum. So I do like that he has that much familiarity. And if you do go with Kevin Stefanski as your OC, you also probably get to keep him longer than you get to keep John DeFilippo.
Could be he might go with rock, paper, scissors.
Rochambeau. I like it. Yeah. Well, let's go on to some less uncertain and scary news and get into even scarier than depressing stuff, I guess, which is the fact that the Super Bowl is here. The Vikings obviously could have been taking part in all the festivities this week and last week, which would have been amazing since I basically have driven by some of the stuff they built at 3 a.m, creepily with my lights off, just in a depressed way because I know the Vikings aren't there. But Joe, you've been there with other people and in the daytime. So I wanted to kind of get your take on some of the stuff that you've experienced with your press pass and
to be honest, I haven't been downtown yet. I'm going to do that tomorrow. But I was over for Super Bowl opening night over in at the XL Energy Center when all the teams come down and they bring them out for interviews and I wrote about this the other day. It's just the strangest thing to me that people paid $32 for just sit there and watch people interview people. Now they did get little microphones that they could listen to the interviews as they were going on, and it was actually better for them because you couldn't get near a guy like Tom Brady, who the reporters were camped out an hour ahead of time waiting to get a position at his station. But it was kind of fun just because all the faces that you see on TV every week on ESPN or what have you, you're seeing there, running. I gave my seat up to Sal Paolantonio. I walked past Ian Rappaport, which surprised me that he was much shorter than I thought he might be. You see, saw this guy, this JB Smoove, I guess his name was
Curb Your Enthusiasm?
I don't know who this guy is, but someone told me that was his name, and he was on the floor interviewing people while they were laying on the floor in the middle of everybody that's tromping around him. I thought that was kind of bizarre. And I saw, what's her name? Zach Ertz's wife being interviewed by some guy in a dog mask. So, and it So it was kind of fun. It was, that every time they bring up the Eagles, that, it was still a partisan Minnesota crowd because, and it wasn't sold out because I'm sure all these Minnesotans stayed away since their team wasn't there. And every time they would bring up, a few people would cheer for the Patriots, and there was they'd bring up the Eagles, and all you heard was boos from the crowd that was there. The people that couldn't resell their tickets that still had to show up. But, it was kind of fun. And then last night I went to the media thaw down at the Mall of America, where they had they wined and dined. The media brought them in and let them ride on rides and gave them food and drink, and saw everybody tromping around. And it was kind of interesting. At one point I sat down next to this guy who was talking on his phone. His name was Richard Gibson from Miami. I heard him say, "Yeah, my eyes froze today. Get me the hell out of here." So I started talking to him after and saying, he'd been to 32 Super Bowls, and I said, is the bummer coming up here? And he says, well, he says, I think he was trying to be nice. I think, he's from Miami, didn't want to come this far north. He didn't have the right jacket. He had to buy a hat because he didn't bring one. And
I've heard that's a problem.
I'm looking at this guy. You've been to 32 Super Bowls. Have you ever left the Mace above the Mason-Dixon line? I mean, what's going on here? And he wasn't at the one in '92, and which the weather was actually a little bit better. And humble brag, I'm beginning to find out that I'm one of the few people that is going to be gone to both Super Bowls here, because me and Sid Hartman about the only two, maybe Royce. I know it's pretty sad, but it's just funny to hear the different perspective. They've all said the same thing, how the people around here are great, but he was just mad having to walk for too far, a number of blocks, and he had to peel his eyes open because his eyelashes were frozen. But
yeah, I saw an article by Dan Wetzel from Yahoo, I think, who basically had said that a lot of the reporters had been complaining about the cold, and his crux was to just embrace the cold and embrace the bold north, as is the tagline after the Bring It Home thing fell apart.
It wasn't like this in '92. It was a little bit more temperate than this. I mean, it was cold. It was, February, and there were some nasty days out here this week, and there could be one tomorrow when I'm going to attempt to ride the zip line across the Mississippi. We'll see how that goes. But, and then I'm hoping to get to the NFL or Super Bowl experience, they call it, which back in '92 I enjoyed it. It was one of the first years they'd done it, and it was pretty neat, and just to see how it's changed since then, and maybe a downtown concert when the Suburbs and Soul Sound and Jayhawks are going to play down there. I'm hoping to go down and see that, but other than that, it's same old stuff, ho hum Super Bowl. So
yeah, I mean it's we're not used to seeing this many famous people up here in Minneapolis, so it's been it's been pretty cool. There's also
Radio Row's kind of nice. They're having fun down there. All the radio stations, certainly the local ones, seem to be jazzed because they get all these guests all week long from out of town. They can just they'll go from one place to the other, because they're all up in the same area, and I think that's fun. Certainly for the listeners around here, they're getting a lot of interesting guests, but. Yeah, it'll only get a little bit more crazier as the week goes on, I suspect.
So do you guys, JR, or just I'll kick this to Joe first and then see what you guys think. Are any of the national writers giving the Eagles a chance to win this game, or is it pretty much, are they selling them as the underdogs again?
I heard one the other day that was picking them. I think this game's a lot closer than people might think. Super Bowls have that long, sordid history of being blowouts that's changed in recent years. So I think this is going to be another one that, you got a tough defense if the spot isn't too big for them. And, it sounds like, since if this guy Peterson outcoached Zimmer last week, you never know what he can do with Belichick. So I think, I think it's going to be a home game for the Patriots, because a lot of the Vikings fans are kind of mad, and those that might go in there might be cheering for the Patriots. So I don't know. I think there are some people that are giving them a chance.
What have you guys seen? Yeah, JR.
Is it just me, or it doesn't seem like a lot of people are talking about the actual game? It seems like there's more talk about, games going on next year, talking about the game in Mexico. Roger Goodell talking about the catch rule, Tom Brady's hand, and what exactly happened to it. But no one's really talking about the actual game. Or maybe, is it just me, or does it seem like that to you guys?
I think that's Super Bowl week, though. That's a big deal to have Roger Goodell's annual chat with the media at Super Bowl week. I mean, some of these things they do every year, and I think as you work your way through the week, you're going to get more and more talk about the game. They're going to have media availability for each team again tomorrow, where you won't have all the crowds or the people watching, and it's going to be a little bit tighter. And I think you'll start getting into the nitty gritty on that in that regard, I believe.
And I know it seems like some of the Vikings writers are just depressed, so they're not maybe talking about it at all, or as much as they otherwise would be if the Vikings maybe missed the playoffs or whatever. So Yeah, I haven't noticed as much, like, in my little sphere of stuff. I mean, literally the number one thing from this week outside of Kirk Cousins was that the NFL is rigged. So that's basically what I had to write about, which kind of shows you where the Vikings writers and fan base are at right now, I think, a little bit. But
I saw a couple of things from Pro Football Focus that they were talking about on their various media outlets. One of the biggest things that gives the Eagles a chance here is there's a certain threshold of pressure that you have to get to like beat Tom Brady in the playoffs, and especially in Super Bowls. And if you remember, the two Giants teams that beat them, they had those crazy defensive lines. Well, Philly's got one that holds a candle to that, and they crossed that threshold in a way that like Atlanta really didn't, or Seattle wasn't really like a pressure team when they played New England. So that could have a huge effect. And then I think on the other side of the ball, it'll be really interesting to see if the Patriots defense is actually as good as their statistics have been, because they've kind of gone up against some anemic offenses even through the playoffs. And we haven't really seen them. We thought they were going to be tested by Pittsburgh, but then Pittsburgh lost. So it'll be really interesting to see if their defense can take care of business in a way that the Vikings defense didn't.
I think they can, because I don't think you're going to see the same game out of Foles you saw in Philly last week. I just don't see it. And if the spot's too big for anybody, it might be him, and that's pretty important position to have some deer in headlights there. But I can't say that's true. But I just don't see the Vikings. What happened last week was so out of the norm. I think if they'd have, rather than turn that ball over twice right away, and they would have got maybe even a second score and put a little more pressure on them, I think you would have seen some panic out of them. But certainly didn't go that way. But you might see it this weekend, because this is a team that's not been there for a while going against a team that's constantly there. So there's not going to be any nerves out of the Patriots, I don't think.
They've been here before for sure. I think I hope that Nick Foles can rise to the occasion and like be a quarterback on Sunday, because otherwise it would just be a boring affair.
Yeah.
But if he does, and if the Eagles have a phenomenal roster up and down, they definitely have the firepower to go toe to toe with the Patriots on every level of the field. It's just a matter of if they can all rise to the occasion, or if maybe they've read too many of their own headlines or whatever. But I think Tom Brady probably is the same Tom Brady you've always. I mean, he's played better ball this year than he has throughout his whole career. He's still peaking. And it's just a matter of if the Eagles can generate pressure in the way that they have all year, and especially against the Vikings, then I think they do have a shot. Like, I'm picking the Patriots, though.
Yeah.
Just want a good game. What do you think, JR? Who do you like?
Well, I've learned that whenever Tom Brady and Bill Belichick are in the Super Bowl, to never bet against them. That's like my golden rule, unless they're playing the Giants. But that's obviously
you learned that from experience. You got burned once before.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, I'm going with the Patriots. Do I think the Eagles can beat them? Definitely, but I think their defense has to play lights out for an entire 4 quarters, and I think Nick Foles has to have another outlier game like he did against Minnesota. Can they do it? Absolutely. But do I think it's going to happen? I don't. I just don't see Nick Foles out-dueling Tom Brady. And I think he's just going to crack the code of this talented Philadelphia Eagles defense. I think he's going to have his way with the secondary. And, I mean, their defensive line is going to get pressure. But if there's one guy that can elude that pressure and maneuver within the pocket to avoid that pressure, I think it's Tom Brady.
Yeah, and if any last year's Super Bowl showed anything, there's really no lead that's safe when Tom Brady's out on the field, unless obviously he's injured. So, speaking of injuries, Gronk is obviously gone through the concussion protocol. I wonder how you can even tell if Gronk is out of the concussion protocol. Because he's dumb, but yeah, hopefully it'll be a entertaining game.
That's what I want ultimately, and I think in a close game I got to go with Brady, but I'd like to see a really close game, nip and tuck up and down the field, and in '92 when I sat there with two teams I wasn't interested in, it was the Redskins over the Bills, and it was over early, and it was pretty boring. And it's like, that's why it would have been so great for the Vikings to be there, because then you're on the edge of your seat the entire time, and you can't even write a word because you're so freaking out about what's going on. But I'm hoping for a good game. It'd be just an exciting game to just edge of your seat, and the fans that are there going nuts, and it's coming down to the last possession. That's what we've got to be hoping for.
Yeah, talk about.
JR, I have a question. Or I guess I have a question for all of you, but directed at JR specifically. If Gronk does play, I'm always interested to think about, you're the opposing defensive coordinator. What do you have? How do you stop Gronk? So I guess, what would you do if you were Jim Schwartz to stop Gronk, assuming he does play?
Well, it's tough because whenever you play Gronk, you have to keep two safeties on the roof, meaning that Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod will have to play in their two deep zone. I don't know exactly what type of coverages that they will play, but you have to keep somebody over the middle of the field because that's really where they like to utilize Gronk. So you have to keep one of those guys over the top, whether you are playing, a two-man coverage or a cover four quarter. So you just have to keep two people on that guy. If you keep single coverage on him, he's going to eat you alive. And we all know the Eagles linebackers aren't great. That's probably the weakest spot on their defense. Daniil Ellerbe actually didn't play against the Vikings, but when he's not on the field, they're historically not very good this season, I should say. I don't think their linebackers match up very well with Gronk. And, I mean, you could say that for any linebacking core in the league, honestly. He's a matchup nightmare. So I think you have to keep one of those safeties over the top of Gronk at all times. But on the flip side of that, that means you're putting your secondary in a lot of one-on-one matchups, which is also a nightmare against Tom Brady because now you're depending heavily on Jalen Mills, Ronald Darby, and Patrick Robinson to hold their receiving core in man-to-man coverage. And you talk about those quick, shifty guys like Brandon Cooks and Danny Amendola that they have, and they thrive against man coverage because, I mean, they're quick and they know how to get open. That's the one thing about the Patriots receivers, and I just don't think they're the type of receiving core that you can play down in, down out man coverage against. And it's just tough to scheme against the Patriots because they have so many offensive weapons. And then to add on to that, you have Tom Brady. So It's tough. It's definitely
he didn't have any trouble when Gronk went out last game against the Jaguars. He was moving the ball up and down the field even though Gronk was injured and out of the game. So put a couple guys on Gronk, and that's going to get somebody else open that he can go to.
Definitely.
And GR, too, we wanted to obviously have you on the show to kind of let people know what to expect as we get closer and closer to the draft. Excuse me. And so I wanted to ask you your feelings on the draft, like what the biggest need you think the Vikings have. I noticed the mock draft, I think on Daily Norseman, came out an hour or two before we started recording the show tonight, which is Wednesday night, and they were talking about bringing in some guards. And Luke, last week or the week before, you touched on that, saying it's a guard-heavy draft or a good draft for guards.
It's a good offensive line draft. So,
yeah, if you wanted to kind of just talk about the need and who you kind of see in that position when the Vikings pick at the end of the first round.
Yeah, so I would say the Vikings really need to beef up the trenches. And what I mean by that is they need to continue to overhaul the offensive line. They got a good start with it last year, signing Reef and Rimmers, and then drafting Elfline, which are three key pieces for the future, I think, for the foreseeable future for their offensive line. But with Joe Berger expected to retire and Nick Easton coming off injury, I think Easton will still be a starter for him next year, but I would like to see him upgrade at guard and get a more talented guy. And they still need to fill that void from Berger, because I don't think they view Isadora as a starter right now, because he didn't even make the active list or active roster going into game day. So that really shows you how far they think he is away right now from really contributing. Yes, he did start a couple games. I know he started against the Browns in London, but he didn't really grade out as well. I think Pro Football Focus gave him an awful grade. I think he had like 35.7 or something like that. He was really bad in that game, but he did show some flashes of some positive things throughout that game. But I just don't think they view him as a starter for the foreseeable future right now. So I think they need to upgrade at that guard spot, and I think they need to do it early, either in the first or the second round. A couple guys there that I really like for him. The first guy I've been advocating is on Twitter. That's Isaiah Wynn from Georgia. I think he would be a fantastic plug-and-play day-one starter for them. He actually started at left tackle for Georgia this past season, but he's only about 6'2", about 310 pounds, so he's lacking some length in order to play on the perimeter at tackle. But if you kick him down inside the guard, I think he's a much better player there. He played mostly there in 2016. He started there at left guard for Georgia, and he also went down to the Senior Bowl last week and dominated at guard. He actually got their Offensive Lineman of the Week award down there because he was such a standout player and really dominated the competition the entire week. Another player very popular on Twitter, and that's Billy Price from Ohio State. I think he would be another great fit for the Vikings. Him and Elflein actually played 36 games together at Ohio State, and we all saw that Spielman is really big on chemistry. We saw when he drafted Kendricks to pair with Anthony Barr, and a lot of people are saying that he can do that again with Elflein and Billy Price. I think Price would be their right guard, because I don't think they would move Elflein to guard and put Price at center, because that gives you two unknowns, because Elflein just hasn't played guard in the NFL, and Price being a rookie, you don't know what he can do at center. So I think if they were to draft Price, I think they would put him at right guard and they would keep Elflein at center. But, I mean, you talk about chemistry and just having two cornerstones of your offensive line for the next 10-plus years. I think Price will be a great fit for him. Transitioning to the other side of the ball, I think the Vikings need to continue to build their defensive line. And what I mean by that is they need to find a three-technique defensive tackle. Tom Johnson is expected to be a free agent. If they do bring him back, he'll be 34 years old, and you just can't rely on him for the future. We all know Sharif Floyd's situation. We wish him the best. We really don't know what's going on with him right now, but you obviously can't count on him. And Jaleel Johnson is pretty much an unknown. I think he was a fourth-round pick, if I remember correctly, but didn't see a lot of action this year. Got more action towards the latter half of the year and in the playoffs, but he didn't really see a lot of action during the season. And I think they view him as a key depth piece down the road. But now I think you need that plug-and-play guy that can come in and play right away. And one guy I think can do that, but I'm not sure if he will be available during the latter half of the draft, and that's Michigan defensive tackle Maurice Hurst. He's a guy that he's a mirror image of Sharif Floyd. How ironic that is. They actually wore the same number in college and actually have the same exact traits. A lot of scouts are questioning his arm length, which was a big question mark with Sharif Floyd coming into the draft, and one of the reasons why he slipped all the way to pick number 23.
Right.
Yeah, in that draft. So I think I think Maurice Hurst will be a great fit for him. If they do decide to address it in the second round, a guy that I like for them, his name is Harrison Phillips from Stanford. A funny analogy I made about him is that if he was in a lineup being picked for a pickup basketball game, he probably would be the last guy picked, because that's how his body looks. He just doesn't look athletic at all, but when you turn the tape on, he just dominates. And he had a great week at the Senior Bowl, and his stock is really starting to pick up right now. So don't be shocked if he ends up going in the first, but I have a late second round grade on him right now. And if that's the route that they decide to go to pick a defensive tackle late in the second round, I think Harrison Phillips from Stanford will be a great pick.
He wouldn't go last if I was in that pickup game.
I have a question for you, JR.
Uh-huh.
Considering that I think the Vikings have a couple of draft needs and I think they need a couple of guards, and I'm just looking at the free agent page and there's a lot of expensive options, but let's just say we don't go there. We don't try to splurge for like an Andrew Norwell or go for like Luke Jekyll or whatever. So say we enter the draft with 2 big open holes at the guard positions. Do you think that this draft is deep enough with those offensive linemen to like justify a trade out of the first round to maybe pick up some of that extra capital so that they could double dip in the offensive line? Or would you rather just have them take a guy at, a guy like one of the guys, Isaiah Wynn or whoever, at 30 and...
Yeah, I think it would be perfectly fine if they did that, if they decided to completely trade out of the first round, because one thing about this draft class is that it's very deep from top to bottom on the interior offensive line. The tackles aren't great. It's very top heavy. But as far as an interior offensive line group, I think it's phenomenal from top to bottom. And, you get in the middle of the draft talking about the 3rd or the 4th round. You talk about guys like a Mason Cole from Michigan, who was a great player. He had a great week down at the Senior Bowl. And another guy that I think would fit the Vikings well, his name is Braden Smith from Auburn. So it's a very deep interior offensive line class. And if that's the route that they decide to choose to go, trading out of the first round and, getting an early 2nd round pick or a middle of the 2nd round pick and making 2 2nd round picks, I think that would be a fantastic route. And that's actually a prediction that I'm going to make. I think the Vikings are going to end up making 2 2nd round picks. I think they're going to trade out of the first round on the first night.
That's totally a Spielman thing. They only have 5, right? They only have 5 picks in this draft, and he starts twitching if he doesn't have at least 8. So, he's going to trade. Yeah, I think you guys have just hit on exactly what they're going to do. I mean, just so they pick in the 2nd round and he doesn't keep trading like last year, my goodness, we're sitting there watching him trade down, and say, got to make a pick one of these times. But they don't have that many holes in their lineup that they need 10 again this year because they don't end up making the team or even the practice squad. What Stacy Coley is signed back to a futures contract, but he couldn't even, so they don't need 10. But
they had a lot of those guys get poached, which kind of was a product of just drafting so many guys. Like they lost Elijah Lee, they lost. Who else did they lose? No, I don't remember. But they lost a few.
I can't remember.
Well, Bucky Hodges got taken, but then he got
Bucky. That's
anyway.
And the Vikings are expected to get 2 compensatory picks as well. 2 6-rounders. That's what they're expected to get projected to get anyway.
For who?
Cordero Patterson and Adrian Peterson.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, that's helpful. That gets Spielman's numbers up there a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. You can trade them now, so that's good.
So did Billy Price start out as a guard at Ohio State, and then he switched to center after Elflein got drafted? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so funny story. He actually came to Ohio State as a defensive lineman, nearly quit the team, and he went to Urban Meyer's office as a freshman. And the way I read it, it actually was a great article. He was in Urban Meyer's office just crying his eyes out because he was about to go home. And he just didn't like it, wasn't feeling it, just wanted to go home. But Urban Meyer begged him to come back, and Price said the only way that I'll come back is if I play offensive line. And he ended up switching him to offensive line, and now he's Ohio State's career or school record holder in consecutive games played with 55. So he played guard up until his senior year, and once Elflein got drafted, they switched him to center. So last year was his first year ever playing center, and just like Elflein, he won the Remington Award, which awards the nation's top center. So pretty good story.
What about free agency? Would the Vikings, since they're kind of in a win-now mode, would they try to, like you said, fill the trenches or whatever you said too, with somebody there in the free agent? Is there somebody out there to grab? Do you think that they could knock off one of those, needs?
Rashid Hageman.
I have one guy that I'd be eyeballing. he played against us in the playoffs. His name is Senio Clemente. He was the backup to I think Gary Evans, or who was it that went down in the Saints playoff game that didn't. I don't know. He was a backup for the New Orleans Saints, but played very well when called upon, and he was just stuck behind a really elite tandem of guards. He's 27. He probably wouldn't come at a very big price tag, and I think he would make a nice addition. There's a lot of buzz about Andrew Norwell from the Carolina Panthers, who's kind of a stud superstar, and if you want to go out and just like throw a bunch of money at the problem, he would be a guy. And then on the other side of the ball, I'll kick it to you, JR, because I know you have strong thoughts about Sheldon Richardson.
Yeah, and Sheldon Richardson is a guy that I've been advocating for. I think he would take the defensive line to another level. He comes with a little bit of baggage. Everyone knows he had his struggles with the Jets. Didn't really have a great year with the Seahawks according to his standards, but he's still better than what the Vikings have in-house. Piggybacking off of you. I can't talk today. Excuse me, guys. An offensive lineman that I would like in free agency, his name is Zach Fulton from the Kansas City Chiefs. He's played center. He's played guard. He's only 26 years old. Kind of been a depth piece on that offensive line, but he's played 46 games for them. Very productive when he does play, and he's a guy that's looking for that first big contract. I don't think it'll take more than $5 or $6 million a year to get him, but I think he's a guy that can come in and be your right guard, and if Elflein does go down, he does have the capability of playing center as well. So keep an eye on Zach Fulton. Yeah, absolutely.
They like those swing players, that's for sure, on the line.
Versatility's always been really important to Rick Spielman.
Yeah.
Do you foresee us going after any corners, JR, with the Terrence Newman situation? I don't think he's obviously announced anything, but he's one of the oldest guys in the league, and he's playing one of the tougher positions to play at as an older guy. So what are your thoughts on that, and where do you think the Vikings might be looking?
Yeah, so it's not really a good cornerback free agent market, in my opinion. There's some guys that are good, but obviously they're going to be too pricey for the Vikings' likings, and they're going to be looking to start, so it wouldn't make sense for them to come to Minnesota. But as I scroll down the list, there's actually one guy that makes a lot of sense, and it's Jonathan Joseph from the Texans. He does have previous experience with Mike Zimmer. I believe they were both with the Bengals from 2008 to 2010. I believe they both were there. And he's that veteran presence that could come in and be your number 3 outside corner that could spell Mackenzie Alexander in the slot as well. He does have that versatility of playing both.
He's almost as old as Newman. How old is he?
Yeah. I believe he's 33.
Oh, okay.
But he's still very productive, and I think he can be that number 3 outside corner. But I still think they need to draft a guy as well because they're getting older at that spot, and Trey Waynes' 5th-year option is coming up. I think they will extend that, but if that position does get a little bit too pricey, I think they need to have that young guy to fall back on.
All right. Well, do you guys have any other scenarios or thoughts on the game this weekend?
I'm just trying to survive the zip line so I can get it to my seat in the game on Sunday.
Please videotape that.
My wife is planning to take pictures. I don't know about videotape. Don't want to hear me squeal like a
That's all I want. I can retire a happy man. But I did want to remind our audience to check for Jordan's stuff and all of our stuff, but over on Vikings territory through the off season. Obviously, we're going to be doing a lot of different draft-related stuff, free agency-related stuff. Vikings territory is actually going down for maintenance as of basically, if you're listening to this, the site will be down for the next 2 days. We're going to be rolling out a new format that should be a lot easier to read and a lot easier to navigate, and so we're hoping to have a better organized site so people can click around and find things like mock drafts and the free agent tracker that Vikings Territory did last season. But you can also check for the stuff by Joe and Luke every Tuesday and Wednesday during the regular season. I think we're going to be doing the show again after the Super Bowl and then taking a couple weeks off with the downtime that comes there. But continue to follow us on social media at purplePTSD on Facebook and Twitter, and at Vikings Territory as well. Want to plug JR's website is climbingthepocket.com. And what is your Twitter handle also?
It's just at J Reid Draft Scout. That's at JREID Draft Scout.
Perfect. I wanted to thank you
Everybody
for coming
knows
on
that.
the show.
Everybody knows JR Draft Scout.
I got to start plugging the Joe Johnson Twitter, get some more of these. I'm getting the truth out there about this rigged situation. If I disappear, you guys know why. It's going to be a zipline accident. But yeah, check back with us next week. We will be back Thursday, and thanks for listening to this edition of the Purple Journal podcast. Enjoy the Super Bowl.